Hello, spectacular entrepreneur. Before we dive into today's podcast episode, this is a quick note from me to let you know that we have a special opportunity coming up for you in episode number 400. We are fast approaching the 400th episode of the podcast, and to celebrate, I'm going to be doing a Q&A episode. If you would like to submit your question for that episode, get yourself a link back, a little shout out on socials. All you need to do is go to tashcorbin.com/question. Pop your question in there. You'll see we've got a whole new system for question submissions. Pop your question in there and I will aim to get through all of them for episode number 400. Thank you so much. Let's dive into this one. Okay, so I feel a little uncomfortable recording this episode of the Heart Center Business Podcast, but I do think it's an important conversation for us to have, and it's one where I am giving advice that I think is counter to a lot of common advice out there. So bear with me on this one, but today in episode number 394, I'm going to be talking about why I don't often recommend charging for your webinars. Now, I know there is a lot out there that talks about the importance of having a small token sum from people to participate in webinars. And if people buy one thing from you, they're far more likely to buy another thing. And so there is a lot of logic behind why charging for webinars is such a good idea and it's an amazing strategy. Today, I want to break down why I don't generally recommend it and what I would recommend doing instead. So, this is episode number 394, which means you can find all the relevant links and show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/394. Now, I'll probably regret doing this because I'm going to get a bunch of butt tashes, but I want you to know that I'm here for them. I'm here for the conversation. So let me get this episode done and then we can continue the conversation over on Facebook or Instagram. Let's dive in. I'm Tash Corbin and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. I've got to say, spectacular entrepreneur, I totally understand why it feels like a smart decision if you are struggling to get webinars converting into paying clients, or you are hesitant to even start running webinars in the first place. I totally understand why it can feel like a really good decision, or it feels like a really powerful strategy to charge people to attend your webinars. Now, when I say webinar, I mean any kind of online event where people are attending to learn from you. So it might be, remembering that webinar means web-based seminar. So it might be described as a workshop, or you could call it a masterclass, or you could call it something else. But ultimately, it's something where if it's free, people give you their email address for it, and then they show up and listen to it live. And if it's paid, they pay you and give you their email address for it, and then they can show up and watch it live. In most cases, live webinars also have a replay or recording that people can watch at their own time. And in some cases, webinars that pretend to be live are actually already pre-recorded. Anything where you sign up and there's like 3 potential times for you to attend that day or the next day, it's pre-recorded. That is actually not live. And so those are pretending to be live, but they are actually using software, automation software, to make it look like it's live, but it actually isn't. So the main reasons that people give me for wanting to charge for their webinars are that they have run a few webinars and they haven't converted, i.e. no one has actually ended up being a paying client, or they don't want to keep giving away great information and training for free, and they feel like it's devaluing what they have to share, or they've been told that if you've already got some money out of someone, then it's easier to get more money out of that person. If they've already invested with you, then they're far more likely to spend more money with you. And then also the final reason that I see quite a lot is that people they're struggling to get money in, and it feels like, well, at least I'll get something. So it's low ticket, it's not a big ask. And if no one ends up buying the upsell, well, then it doesn't matter because at least I've been paid a decent amount of money for that amount of time. So as I said at the start of the episode, I totally understand a lot of the logic behind it. But I also know that in my experience, a lot of that logic just doesn't stand up anymore. So the first one that I want to address is actually the upsell. So if you've run webinars before and they're just not getting any conversion for people working with you further, then the assumption that either people will pay you for the webinar, therefore you can make some money, or if people pay you for the webinar, they're going to be more likely to upsell and buy something else from you, is actually no longer given, especially not in the online business space. So let's talk about the lack of upsell. In most cases, if someone is coming to your free webinar and they aren't buying the upsell, i.e. the offer that you're presenting at the end of the webinar and in the follow-up email sequence, simply charging for the webinar itself does not magically solve the upsell issue. So if a free webinar is not converting with the upsell, the offer that you're presenting, chances are the webinar is not being pitched in the right place, i.e. the webinar and the upsell aren't closely linked together enough, and the webinar does not resolve the final hurdle or barrier before people are ready to invest in the bigger upsell. Or your pitch for that upsell just was not strong enough. You are not articulating the value proposition of what you are selling effectively enough. So in a lot of cases, if you then put a price tag on your webinar, you're just delaying the realization that your offer is not strong enough, or that the topic covered in the webinar is not closely linked enough or pitching to the right audience. And so you would be better off focusing on improving and refining the webinar design as well as the upsell in order to maximize the return on investment for your time in presenting the webinar. Now, the next assumption, the next logical reason to charge for webinars, in that if people pay for it, it's easier to get more money out of them with an upsell, is also built from data that doesn't always apply to our model of business. So one of the big things that is needed in an ascension model of business, which is that model of sell something for $19, then immediately upsell to something that's bigger, then immediately upsell to something that's bigger, is that we need to, once the person has invested in the lower ticket, then start to explain to them why the thing that they just bought isn't enough for them to achieve the goal that they thought they were going to achieve with that smaller ticket item. And for most heart-centered entrepreneurs, for most people who want to have a values-aligned, consent-based business, immediately discrediting the thing that people just paid you money for doesn't feel like a good values alignment fit either. And what ends up happening is, in order to not have to do that, people design paid webinars and masterclasses that are even further separated from their upsell or their next offer. And so they just don't see the conversion rates that are being bandied about by other people who say when they started charging for their webinars, they went from 5% of leads converting into upsells to 15% of leads converting into upsells. Now, if the reason why you think you would do better charging for your webinar is because you have no upsell, remember that 3 times 0 is still 0. So just charging for your webinar won't solve that issue. There are other issues that also come up when you charge for a low ticket product or a webinar. And that is that you will have far less people actually sign up. So where you might have 50 or 70 people sign up for a free webinar, what I see happen in the online space a lot of the time is that people then put a price tag on their webinar, and even if they're only charging $9, they'll see the sign up rate go down to 5 people had registered, or 10 people have registered for that webinar. Now you've gone from 50 potential leads for your offer down to 5 or down to 10. So in a lot of cases, one of the big benefits of running free webinars consistently is the consistent list growth that you achieve and building a relationship with those people who join your mailing list. Even if they don't end up buying from you from this webinar, you've now got an opportunity to build a relationship, to add value, to talk about your work from multiple angles. And the people who join my mailing list on a webinar are the most likely people to buy from me in my next webinar. So people who sign up to my webinars from my mailing list are far more likely to buy from me than people who sign up to my webinars from cold sources on the internet. And because of that, I don't need to put pressure on people who've just signed up to a webinar to now buy something from me on that very same webinar. I can come at this from a space of abundance and know that if now is not the right time for them, and I do put in that time and energy to really finesse my upsell and ensure I'm giving my offer a really strong pitch. But if they don't buy from me in that first ever webinar that they've signed up for, I have no concerns about that because I know that it's far more important that we build a relationship. I know that that person is going to be a valued member of the community and is going to contribute to conversations and, is likely to respond to emails and give me insights as to what they're looking for as we move forward in our relationship together. And ultimately, the longer someone stays as an engaged member of my mailing list, the more likely they are to buy from me. But I'm able to have no attachment to that purchase because I know that the more I grow my mailing list, the more money comes in, the more sales I'll make. So I then don't have to put pressure on certain individuals or people signing up at a certain time to then buy from me. And it is a much more energetically aligned space for me, and it's a much more abundant feeling for me as I grow my business as well. But then you also have some other challenges. So when it comes to scaling up the number of people who are signing up for your webinars, the cost per lead, i.e. the cost to get someone to sign up for a free webinar, is about 1/5 to 1/10 of the cost to get someone to sign up for a paid webinar. And in all of the multi-6-figure and 7-figure businesses that I know who run ads to a paid webinar, they pay more per person signing up for the webinar than they get from the sign-up fee. So I know someone who charges $9 for their webinar and they pay between $30 and $40 per person who pays them that $9. And they're willing to do that because they've got a very aggressive, very strong upsell from that paid webinar into their next offer. So in a lot of cases, it actually takes more budget to get the same number of people signed up to a paid webinar than it does to get them signed up to a free one. And if we are looking at this as a long-term growth strategy for your business, then we don't need to be attached to always converting people into paying clients straight away from that webinar immediately. In addition, if people have paid for something, we strike other issues when it comes to upselling, and particularly if you sell to women and marginalized people. And the reason why we see these issues come up, particularly for women and marginalized people, is because they have spender's guilt when they haven't completed something that they've purchased. So we have the homework issue. If you are delivering a webinar that is paid, if someone hasn't done their homework from that webinar, well, they haven't actually done the work to justify what they spent. So even if they spent $25 signing up for that webinar, if out of that they got 3 pieces of key homework they needed to get done, until that homework is complete, most people will not allow themselves to even consider another investment. So that logic-y bit that says if someone buys from you, they are 5 times or 6 times more likely to buy something else from you is generally not within that first 30-day period. unless you apply pressure and diminish the value of the thing that they just purchased. You've basically got to tell them, oh, don't worry about doing the homework from that paid webinar that you just paid for. That doesn't count. If you really want the outcome, you have to do this thing instead. And so most people feel really out of alignment saying that, so they don't say that. And so then you'll see this much bigger delay between people buying a paid webinar and purchasing from you compared to if they signed up for a free webinar and then purchased from you further down the track. So the homework issue can be a big one. The second one is the overwhelm issue. And the overwhelm issue comes from this sense that often people who buy those low ticket products tend to buy a lot of them. And so your low ticket webinar, your $9 webinar, your $29 webinar, or whatever it is that they've purchased will be sitting accumulating digital dust in a digital graveyard full of things that they have spent a low ticket amount of money on, but they must get back to that. Oh, I'm meaning to get back to that. I will get back to that. I'll finish watching that. And so whereas if someone has not paid for your webinar and they haven't completed it, they have far less guilt about the fact that they haven't completed it, and they're far less likely to hold themselves back from purchasing anything else until they've actually completed it. So where that webinar is free, they have far less sunk costs. They have far less guilt about buying something else when they haven't finished it. And so you don't require people having finished it and done all the homework and feeling like they really got their money's worth before they'll consider the next offer from you. And then we also have that delay of upsell. So if someone's purchased something, they're experiencing the homework issue, or they're experiencing that overwhelm, or they've made a pact with themselves that they have to finish something before they're allowed to buy the next thing, then you're going to see that extra delay between them doing the webinar with you and actually buying the next thing. So it can actually delay that upsell instead of fast track it the way that some marketers would have you believe it is fast tracked. The next one that I want to unpack is this sense that people don't value things if they don't pay for them, or that you are somehow undervaluing or devaluing yourself by giving away this information and presenting these webinars for free. Now, I want to draw your attention to a previous podcast episode of mine. It was day 12 of Tashmas, not long ago, where I talked about this premise that if you give away too much for free, people won't buy from you. And I actually did unpack that in a lot of different angles. I also did cry in that episode, so I'm really surprising myself that I recommend you go back and watch it. But if you come to episode number 394's show notes, I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes of today's episode. So those show notes are at tashcorbin.com/394. So one of those big ones that, people tend to get caught up in is this belief that they're presenting really valuable information and they're putting all of this time and energy into this. And so if they just then give that away for free to whoever wants it, they're somehow devaluing their expertise and their knowledge. Well, the big key pieces of this, and I won't repeat everything I covered in the previous Tashmas episode, but the big key pieces of this are, number one, if you think all the value you have to offer and all of the value of what you have to share can be wrapped up in 1 hour in a webinar, then I think you are undervaluing yourself because you are underestimating the impact that you can really have when people choose to work with you and invest with you. And the second thing is that no one actually pays for information these days. Information is readily available online. We have a plethora of information available at our fingertips these days, and we don't even have to do the searching and collating of that information. We can get AI tools like ChatGPT to do that for us. People are not investing in working with you because you have amassed a certain 1 hour structured piece of information. People are investing to work with you because they have something they want to change, achieve, or transform in their lived experience. And in order to do that, they need to have that high touch, highly connected experience of working with you in most cases. Even if it's a group program that you're offering or a self-study course, those courses, if they're well designed, are not purely throwing information at people. They are leading people through a process of transformation. That's where the value of courses and group programs comes from, and that is the deep value that you have to offer in your services. So if you think that you can somehow devalue yourself or somehow talk people out of ever working with you simply because they heard 1 hour of information, then I think that there's a big mindset piece there for us to uncover and really assess. And I also would love to have a look at your value proposition in your core messaging, because it sounds to me like your value proposition is missing a huge big component of the transformation that you facilitate. And in relation to other people's perceived value of your thing, I understand that like every marketer and their dog wants to convince you that when people pay for something, they value it far more. But I want to say to you that I get far more gratitude, shout outs, and people referring their friends through to me because of the epic value I've delivered in free offerings, in free webinars, and in free challenges that I've run over the course of my business than I've ever got in relation to the one-to-one services I provide or the group programs. Because people expect value when they've paid for it, but what they don't expect is how much they are surprised and delighted to get really deep insights, really practical step-by-step strategy when all they did was sign up for something free of charge. And so that premise that people don't value something simply because it's free is often just an excuse that is given as to why you've had low show-up rates for something or why something hasn't necessarily worked. And I think the longer you keep believing or convincing yourself that the key problem here is just that no one paid for it, so it just attracted tire kickers, is actually going to keep you stuck in having very poor quality messaging and keep you in this sense that everyone out there on the internet is just out there trying to waste your time and get everything for free. And think about the energetic output that you are putting out onto the internet then when you are showing up in your business, and the message you are subconsciously sending to the people who are interested in what you're sharing or who are following you online, to say that you are so dismissive of them that you do not believe they will pay attention or complete something or participate fully or even value something that you've put your time and energy into sharing unless they pay money for it. And I think it's quite dismissive of your audience. And at the end of the day, do I want to be known as the person who charges for what other people give away for free? Or do I want to be known as the person who gives away for free what other people charge for? I love that my business is successful enough and spacious enough that I can show up and generously provide free resources, free training, and free information to my audience that helps them to move closer to being ready to invest in working with me, feeling like they are more confident in the growth strategy that they've got for their business, feeling more confident in their business idea. I would much rather facilitate all of that for free than to hold back and charge for it only for those people who are already committed. And ultimately, I feel like that also gives off this vibe that my business is only for those people who pay for things. And that's not the vibe that I want to give. I want everyone who's exploring and dabbling in online business, who's just playing around the edges, who's thinking about planning, maybe thinking about contemplating doing something maybe one day. I want everyone to feel like there's something here that can help them move forward and move closer to that dream of starting and growing their online business and scaling it up to create that sense of financial freedom and abundance. Now, I also think I should give a little bit of balance to this podcast episode because I do think that there are some times where it does make logical sense and it does make strategic sense to charge for things like webinars or even challenges and other things that might normally be free lead magnets. So the number one reason that I would say is a great reason to start charging for something is because of the demand that you have for it when it's free and the capacity that you have in order to hold that space and protect that space for the people who are participating in it. So if you are getting hundreds and hundreds of people signing up for your free webinars and you're finding it's more challenging to connect with those people within that group who are the ones who are the most likely to take action, the ones who are asking the most powerful questions, the ones who are really leaning in, then charging for that webinar may be a great way to just reduce the number of people participating so that you can be more effective at giving that space holding. But also if you are in your webinars giving feedback and answering questions and trying to manage a very busy chat box, it can sometimes be a good idea to then charge from it because you're going to limit your numbers down. But you need to ensure that you have ongoing list growth strategies in place that are doing that list growth for free, i.e. getting people signing up for free lead magnets in some other way at scale on a regular basis before I would recommend charging for your webinars. And then for me, I have a very tangible example of this, and that is my client attraction challenge. So the last few times that I have facilitated the client attraction challenge, I've had 1,100 people signed up. I think the last one was like 780 and I didn't even really advertise it. So it's a very popular challenge that I've facilitated, and part of the process of that challenge is getting feedback from me on the niche decisions, the messaging in those first couple of days. And so I was finding it really challenging to keep up with all of the feedback that I needed to give and ensuring that everyone got that attention and got that support throughout that 5-day process. And also, I was also finding that the people who were demanding my feedback on things, I had people who were tagging me in their posts and saying, hey, you haven't given me feedback on this. And there was this expectation then that people would get that one-to-one support through the 5-day challenge. Well, those people were likely the ones who were not actually going to be upselling into the next thing. They were also people who hadn't actually read all of the instructions. They weren't following the instructions. They were just expecting me to fix that for them with one-to-one mentorship in a free challenge. And so that really made it clear for me that I do want to reduce the numbers of people participating in the challenge so that every single person can get that feedback and that they're not demanding it on something that was for free, where in every email I've said not everyone is going to be able to get feedback because this is a free challenge. And so instead, I can actually give that guarantee to people that if you participate in the feedback threads, you will get feedback on your posts. And also another reason is creating that sense of safe space. So something that came to my attention last year was that in previous rounds of the 5-day client attraction challenge, when I ran it for free, when people completed their tasks each day, they were sharing it over into the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs community, which is an open community for 35,000 people. And in that community, I actually had a half dozen business coaches and business mentors who were actively targeting participants in the 5-day client attraction challenge to offer them support for free, feedback for free. They were trying to friend request and cold DM, and they were putting lots of supportive comments on the posts of participants in the 5-day client attraction challenge because they were trying to swoop in and steal them as paying clients. Now, I'm not someone who feels that I need to protect, my clients or, protect that space, but I did find it completely inappropriate that these particular coaches would think it was okay to not run their own challenge, not attract their own leads, but instead just actively target participants in my 5-day client attraction challenge, because those people were exactly in their target market. They were people who were wanting to grow their online business and attract more clients, and they wanted to improve their messaging. And so I also wanted to move the 5-day client attraction challenge to its own private space, where I could ensure that there was a little bit more protection for those participants so that they would not be targeted as potential leads by people pretending to either be interested in working with them or wanting to follow them, who then swooped in with some kind of free offer. We even had someone who was a messaging specialist private messaging participants in the challenge saying, oh my gosh, like, I love what you've shared, but I can see Tash hasn't given you feedback yet. Would you be open to hearing my feedback? Because I do specialize in copywriting and messaging, and I think your work is so spectacular and magnificent, and I would really love to help you. No obligations. Why don't we jump on a free chat and I'll give you some feedback on that messaging so that you can get it really nailed, because I would love to see you succeed. And so I have no hang-ups or judgment of any participant in the challenge who would have taken up that offer, because that sounds so generous and so lovely. But I do believe that those coaches were acting out of integrity in targeting participants in the 5-day client attraction challenge in that way. So the decision to move the 5-day challenge into something that is a paid event, where I can not only give that guarantee of feedback and that extra space holding because it's a reduced participant numbers, but then also move that challenge over to its own private community, where I can protect those participants a little more from being targeted by shady business coaches. It just felt like a really logical decision to move it into a different space in my business. But the expectation of the 5-day client attraction challenge to then be a core lead magnet of my launches is reduced. So I'm not relying on that challenge as being my lead magnet, my only lead magnet for a launch of the Takeoff program or of any program in particular. What it's doing is, as a paid experience, helping people to move forward in and of itself. And so that challenge now has become its own product, and the pressure to upsell from that product into something else is significantly diminished. And it is an opportunity to strike up that conversation and get to know more individuals on a one-to-one basis by working with them in that way. But there's no, there's no need for me to put the pressure on that to be a part of my launch that's going to get that 5% upsell or that 7% upsell or 11% upsell, which is what it has done in the past. So there's not as much expectation on that to actually convert into something else. And there's a lot of reasons why hosting that challenge in a different way now makes far more sense for my business. And ultimately, I have so much confidence in that process because I've run it as a free challenge since 2019. And so I usually run it 3 times a year. And I think this is going to be like the 13th or 14th round of the Client Attraction Challenge. And so I also feel like I can bring a little more depth to it, and I can make it a little more hands-on and tangible for people. And so it will be far bigger in its delivery. It will be far smaller in its participants. There'll be far more one-to-one connection, and it really fits my business model in a different way now. So yes, there are some cases in which some kind of low-ticket offer is a good idea. Moving something that's previously been a free lead magnet into a paid one, I can see the logic behind it, and there are some great reasons. But most of the reasons that are cited by people when I have a conversation with them are built on a little bit of fuzzy logic or built on old school marketing premises that don't necessarily apply to the current online environment, or they don't take into consideration that you're selling to women and marginalized people, where you're going to have that reluctance to invest in the next step of working with you before completing the current one. So hopefully you've found that really helpful. In the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/394, I'm going to pop the links to a couple of podcast episodes that are specifically about webinars. So if you have identified that your webinar is not necessarily converting into paying clients effectively, we need to reassess the structure of that webinar and its design first and foremost. So I've got some podcast episodes that will help you with that. And as I mentioned before, I will also put a link to day 12 of Tashmas, the most recent one. If you missed that one, you'll remember it if you listen to it, because it's the one that I cry in. But if you missed that one really is helpful for helping you to understand the balance of how much information do you put into a free webinar like that, and the difference between overloading people with information or overwhelming people with too much homework for them to do on the webinar. And so how do you structure the free things that you give away to maximize conversion and also maximize the value for people who participate in it, is all covered in that episode. And I wouldn't be doing my job as a marketer if I didn't also include all the details of the next client attraction challenge. So if that does sound like something you are looking for extra support with to really nail your niching, your messaging, your value proposition, and how you attract and convert clients from online channels in particular, then make sure you come and check that out. I'll ensure we've got the link over with the show notes at tashcorbin.com/394 as well. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.